Over 20 years ago, Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly scared the heck out of players and told one of the most haunting stories in gaming. And now it's back in 2026, and this remake wants to prove it can still stand as one of the greatest games in the genre. So did it succeed or fail? Let's find out. I'll start it off by saying that one of my biggest takeaways is just how faithful this remake is to the original source material. The story remains pretty much untouched, and it's one of the best decisions the devs could have made. It still follows Mio and Mayu trapped in Minakami Village, cursed by a failed ritual tied to the village's dark past where spirits haunt them at every turn. The game still centers around survival as much as it is about the emotional core between the twin sisters. There's obviously more depth to the story overall, and even some new alternate endings. And on top of that, there are also side stories you can go out of your way to experience outside of the main path, which adds even more depth to the world and its characters. But simply to avoid spoilers, you'll just have to experience it for yourself. But moving on to the gameplay itself, it feels familiar but not completely identical. And the puzzles in this game are a great example of this. A lot of them are similar in concept, but they've changed around enough to where it doesn't feel like you're just going through the motions again. They do make you use that pink thing between your eyes even if you remember the original. And something I really liked is how the camera lenses are used not just for combat, but also for the puzzles, like opening certain doors, interacting with objects, and uncovering hidden items. It does add a nice layer of immersion to the overall gameplay. And speaking of the gameplay, combat is a bit tougher this time around, but in a good way. For example, when fighting off the spirits, you'll notice they turn red sometimes and enter an aggravated or bloom state because they have been consumed by intense resentment, making them exceptionally powerful. But using the camera obscura still feels satisfying here, always trying to get that perfect zero shot. And you still have the ability to upgrade it as well as its multiple lenses, making combat even more satisfying. Another major addition to the combat is the willpower system. This new system plays a huge role here because if you get caught off guard or attacked by a ghost, your willpower drops, making encounters more challenging. So you'll definitely need to keep an eye on that and use lunar incense to replenish it. You also have more options in combat here, like a dodge mechanic and even stealth attacks if you play your cards right. So while the combat is harder, you also have more control of how you handle your encounters. And speaking of stealth attacks, there are new manual stealth mechanics, and I think it works fairly well here. These new stealth options include crouching, flashlight toggling, and hiding. Instead of just running away from the Kusabi and Sae in certain sections, you will need to hide now, which adds more to the tension. And the Kusabi is more intense this time around because he is treated more like a stalker type enemy now. So having to hide from him makes those encounters feel a bit more intense and strategic instead of just panic running into the next room. Another small addition that I liked about the gameplay is the hand-holding mechanic between Mio and Mayu. It may sound simple, but it actually adds a lot emotionally. It makes their connection feel stronger and helps ground the story a bit more. It is also a way to acquire free health and willpower so you don't have to use up precious items. Another detail I really appreciated about this remake was the addition of collectibles. There are hidden items such as twin dolls that you need to capture photos of that unlock charms and other bonuses, which definitely gives you more incentive to poke around and explore. And speaking of exploration, Minakami Village looks phenomenal in this remake. It definitely feels more detailed and more alive. Well, as alive as a haunted village can feel. But seriously though, the added depth to the environment makes exploring that much more engaging than ever before in the original. Visually speaking, in general, the game looks great. The lighting and effects especially stand out here. Everything from the way the shadows move to how environments are lit really adds to the overall atmosphere. But what really stood out to me is the sound design. The soundtrack is mostly the same, which is perfect because the original game already nailed it back in 2003. And the overall audio design, like footsteps, whispers, and environmental sounds, all really capture that constant feeling of unease. And yes, the voice acting is also really well done here in my opinion. Even though the original game's voice acting was actually really well done too, especially for horror games of the time, this version holds up and fits the tone really well. I do gotta say though that I played it with the Japanese voices because it just fits better in my opinion. Now, as much as I really do love this remake, I do have a few nitpicks of my own. One thing that I really wish they kept here was the ability to briefly play as Mayu, like in the original game. And I mean, it's not a huge deal, but it did add a little extra perspective to the story that I think is missing here. And it seems like that idea was replaced with things like the tracer lens for the camera obscura, which is cool, but it's just not the same. And my next little gripe is kind of a general issue I find in most modern horror games in the genre, but I really miss the fixed camera angles. Survival horror games nowadays utilize more modern camera systems, which kind of makes sense, but I do feel like something gets lost because of it. I even noticed this in games like the Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil remakes, but I also love those games as well. There's just definitely something about those fixed cameras that made older games feel more tense and unpredictable. Which, to me, the original Fatal Frame 2 feels scarier in my opinion because of this. But it might also be that old PS2 aesthetic. I don't know. But one thing I do know is that this style of game can still work today. I mean, we have new games like Tormented Souls. I also think that modern games in the genre can be a bit handholdy at times, and this remake is guilty of it too, especially with navigation. While it can be a bit helpful, it can take away the feeling of being lost and vulnerable, which is kind of the point of this genre. But all nitpicks aside, overall I had a really great time with this remake. It stays true for the most part to what made the original special, while adding just enough ideas to make it worth revisiting. The gameplay is satisfying, the atmosphere is strong, and the story still hits the way it's supposed to. And the fact that it's priced at $50 opposed to $70 is a big win too. Overall, if you are a fan of the original, or the genre as a whole, you should give this remake a try in my opinion. And if you've never actually played the original Fatal Frame 2 before, this is a really solid way to experience it for the first time. But that's going to wrap it up for this review, and if you guys have stuck around this long, I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching my review of Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly Remake.